Welcome back everybody. Today we're doing a real minimum requirement to play Wukong, and it's going to be on the Intel platform with the Nvidia GPU. That's because my AMD M4 motherboard just died on me, so AMD M4 CPU will be later on with the AMD GPU. So if you look at the proposed minimum requirement, it's i5 8400 or Ryzen 5 1600, 16GB of memory, a GTX 1060 6GB variant, or the AMD Radeon RX 580 8GB. You need 130 gig of storage, and it's recommended to have a SSD. We don't know at which resolution, so we're going to assume it's 1080p. We don't know at which setting, so I assume it's going to be at low, and we don't know what was the target FPS, so we're going to assume it's 30. One thing that they let us know is all the hardware was used with DLSS, FSR, and XeSS. Surprisingly, DLSS, I don't know how they did, because there's no card that supported in the minimum requirement. So let's jump in. Welcome to World's Smartest PC. I'm Dunk. Let's game on. Quick disclaimer, I'm playing on a fresh Windows install with the driver updated and the game install and MSI Afterburner. Nothing else, no junkware. I'm going to start with the i5 6500 instead of the i5 8400, so we drop down 2 generation. Also, instead of the GTX 1060 6GB, I'm going to use the 3GB variant, because we're trying to find the real minimum requirement. Obviously, we play at 1080p, low settings, FSR enable. The GPU seems to be able to hold itself, because we are at 29 FPS, just shy to reach the 30 FPS target, but I guess it's playable. We get as high as 40 and as low as low 20s, so watch out for the starter. Obviously the GPU is at 99% of position, and the CPU is at in the high 80s, so going lower in the CPU might not be a good idea. For the RAM, we're using 13 to 14 GB of system memory, so I'm at ease to say that the 1060 3GB variant is a card that can play the game. It's playable. Maybe you play a bit more with the settings. Now jumping to a more recent card, the GTX 1650, better than the 1060 3GB, but lower than the 1060 6GB. This card fares quite well at 1080p, low settings with FSR enable. We're averaging 55-56 FPS. That means you can even go play with some visual settings to enhance a bit the visual. And since the GPU is a bit more powerful, the CPU have a less strain. It's in the low 70% of its position instead of high 70. Same go for the memory. We're at 11.5 system memory. That is quite a decent result for a card of that age. If that is your spec, you don't have any issue to play this game. Jumping to the next card is the GTX 1050 Ti. This is find some kind of HUD GPU, because it's supposed to be lower performance than the GTX 1060, even the 3GB variant, but the 1050 Ti have 4GB of VRAM. And dying to the same bus, I have a higher FPS. I'm at 34. The GTX 1060 3GB variant was giving me 29. So the GPU is performing better than the 1060. CPU utilization and system memory stay the same as the GTX 1060 3GB. So if you have even an old GTX 1050 Ti, the game is playable, highly playable. And since this card is made in a low profile and the i5 6500 is in a lot of office PC, you can easily turn your office PC, old office PC that you can find on eBay or US Market, and become a Wukong playable PC. Just make sure you have your 16GB of memory on that system, because it seems to love a lot system memory. Now going even older, the GTX 960 4GB variant, which is a little bit more performant than the GTX 1050 Ti, is actually the GTX 1060 6GB variant superseded. The GTX 1060 3GB variant is theoretically more performing than the GTX 960, but having 4GB of VRAM instead of 3, that helped a lot the GTX 960. And in the FPS while playing, we are 38 FPS average, a little bit even higher than the GTX 1050 Ti, and definitely higher than the 1060 3GB. And there's still the option to play at 720p if you want to. You really want to play that game. Then the last GPU on this video will be the GTX 950. This is a 2GB card, and we won't be able to go even lower than that because the game is DX12. And lower than that is the GTX 750 Ti, which I won't even try, because even the GTX 950, we averaging 16 FPS. I don't even think dropping the resolution to 720p will help that much. And I'm so tired to die to this guy just to do those benchmark that I won't even try. CPU wise, you may be able to drop even lower, maybe 4th gen i5. I'll try later on, maybe on a short video. For sure a older i7 will do the job. And just thinking I have to die to this guy to try to find the AMD GPU that is the real minimum requirement, and also try the Intel card. I have to die quite a lot of times to still have the same scene. So right now I'll say the winner is the GTX 1050 Ti. Is the closest to 30 FPS without be under 30 FPS. Because the 1063GB we were averaging 29 and often dropping the mid 20s. So the winner, GTX 1050 Ti. Thanks to all for watching, and see you in the next one. And subscribe.